Maniac is a remake of the 1980s seminal slasher classic of the same name that was directed by William Lustig and written by star Joe Spinell. In this remake, written by Alexander Aja, who's also known for remaking these films, Elijah Wood plays the lead Frank Zito, a mannequin restorer and a deeply disturbed serial killer.
I think you're cute. You like it rough?
What do you do exactly?
I take pictures of mannequins. I try to bring them to life.
Would you like to see my work? I think you're incredibly talented.
The mages have found the last true romantic.
I don't know about all that.
Stop staring. You're missing a movie.
Now, the original Maniac is not the most well-known slasher out there. It's not the most highly regarded. But for me, at least, I think it's pretty seminal. It's pretty important. And it has a lot of really fantastic effects work from Tom Savini. It has actually a pretty good, interesting story that has a bit of a romance subplot that you actually don't see coming. And it really captures the early 80s grungy, grimy, seedy feeling of not only an exploitation slasher film, but New York City at the time. The original is one of those films that has always struck me as being kind of unique because it's a slasher film that's told entirely from the perspective of the killer. You spend the entire movie with him. It's about his struggle with his psychosis and his troubled past. And about halfway through, he meets a photographer and they start a relationship. And there's real character development and there's a real story that goes with that. And it's surprising because the movie, it has an the original has an interesting structure of, it switches back from like scenes of him going out at night and killing prostitutes to scenes of him and his new girlfriend like going out on picnics and like dinner dates and shit.
Horror movie opened tonight in Hollywood officially and all over the Los Angeles area. There's a lot of controversy over this one, which is why we're paying attention to it. Feminists in particular have said that this is a film that promotes harm to women. Ann Martin has more on it right now. Ann.
Christine, the movie is Maniac, and the billboards themselves are pretty gruesome. Moviegoers tonight told me the plot is a man who hated his mother goes out and kills women.
And it's really kind of striking to see that juxtaposition between the two lives of the main character, Frank Zito, who is played wonderfully by Joe Spinell. If you haven't seen any Joe Spinell movies, if you haven't seen Joe Spinell in anything, he's in The Godfather 1 and 2, so if you haven't seen him in those movies, why haven't you watched the Godfather movies yet? But Joe Spinell was a fantastic actor. He was a really good writer too, because I do think the original script for Maniac is a good movie. Fun fact, the song She's a Maniac, which was written for Flashdance, was originally written for the movie Maniac.
All I can say is that when you talk about violence towards women and brutality, this just typifies it, and I think that it is shocking and it contributes to the injury of women.
There is that one scene, the classic Tom Savini gets his head blown off with a shotgun, and it's very well regarded among gore fans and horror fans. But Maniac has always kind of been one of those movies that I think slipped kind of between the cracks. It's not really well known in the mainstream. It's not, people are aware of it, but they've like, I don't feel like a lot of people have seen it. I could be completely wrong about this. I feel like if I had asked one of the older people who were in the theater at like World War Z, they would have no idea. If like, hey, have you seen Maniac? They would have no idea what I was talking about. I feel like it's that type of horror movie where like horror, like there are the horror fans who are just into the bigger titles, and then there are like the freaks like me who like everything, who want to expose themselves to as much shit as they can. I'm actually a little bit more into the more extreme stuff. To all the people who say I'm not extreme enough, I'm too conservative to review extreme movies. You need to see what movies I've seen. I would love to sit down and watch Grotesque with you someday and see how you take that in.
Oh, he's beautiful. Oh, I love him. Thank you. Thank you very much. By the way, this is Rita. Rita, come here. It's the girl you saw in the photograph, remember?
Oh, yes. Nice to meet you. You're more beautiful in person than you are on your photograph.
This remake, it's good, it's decent, it does a lot of the scenes over, which I didn't mind, and it has a similar story, very similar story, almost actually identical, but the big difference between this movie and the original is that this movie is entirely point of view, which is peculiar, and I kept questioning why they did it. As I was watching the movie, I'm not necessarily saying that I had a problem with it, I just kept wondering, what was the reason they decided to do this? If it is trying to make you vicariously live a serial killer's life, that is kind of disturbing, but if it's meant to make you feel trapped with the character and his psychosis, and it's kind of implied that the character, when he's killing people, he doesn't really have a lot of control over what he's doing. If the movie's trying to create that feeling, it kind of worked. Because I've seen the original and I know how the plot points are going to bear out, that it worked and it didn't. It might work on a viewer who doesn't really have any history with this title, with the original, and is going into this remake blind. It might work with them, but with me, all of the kill scenes are kind of the same thing. It, like, even does the thing from the original where he tracks a girl through an entire subway station and it's about 15 minutes before he actually like stabs her to death. It does that entire thing again, and I knew, like, okay, well, this is gonna end in a bathroom and he's gonna stab her to death. Actually, it doesn't end in a bathroom, it ends in a parking lot, but I knew, like, this is where this is going to lead. It's a real technical achievement, but I don't necessarily know if it helps the story at all, because I actually think that that's the failing of this movie. While this movie has the same plotting as the original, I don't feel like it has the same amount of depth, and it's not as compelling. For one thing, they mostly kind of throw the structure out of, you know, you see his nightlife of killing prostitutes, and then you see his day life of restoring mannequins, and his dates and his outings with his girlfriend. It doesn't really play that up as much. It's actually mostly just about the relationship between him and his girl, and occasionally it flashes back to his mother, you know, banging many dudes in front of him, and occasionally he'll go out and kill a person, but it's mostly just about the relationship. It's mostly just about his, like, fracturing psyche and him trying to get a hold of his insanity, which is never really explained what it's implied what it comes from and what he's suffering from, but it's never really explained, not very concisely, which kind of annoyed me, because it is, for the most, like, it's not explained in the original, and it's just implied like it is in this one, but they do it a lot better. You get a more complete vision of who the lead character is, and you get a more complete vision of who all the characters are in the original. But I don't think this new one is bad. It does have bad elements to it. For one thing, I really did not like a lot of the dialogue. How are you today? Oh, that's good. Let's go do that. Like, that type of dialogue where it's very, like, stale. It's very wooden. And there were a couple occasions where the characters would act kind of out of character, kind of a little bit too peculiar for the scene. The gore in it is quite good, actually, though, and so is the music. Those are the two best things about this movie. The gore and the music are really well done. And Elijah Wood's performance, the performance that he puts in, is good. I think Elijah Wood is a really good actor. I don't care if you don't. Like, he's one of those actors that I really, like, there are some actors where I care what your opinion is, but on Elijah Wood, I have decided he's good, and I don't care what you have to say about him.
I don't know about all that.
There are a few things of note in this movie that I find pretty interesting. For one thing, this movie was produced by Blue Underground, the DVD distribution company. I thought that was pretty interesting. It's kind of like how Bloody Disgusting is starting to make movies, or at least Brad Miska is starting to produce them with, like, with VHS and stuff. I find that pretty interesting that Blue Underground produced this movie. There is a scene in this movie where it does the poster. You see a reflection of the character holding a scalp with his knife and his, the little bulge going on in the jeans, and it's a reflection against a car door. And it's about like 5 seconds long, but I was like, oh, I see what you're doing there, movie. Nice reference to the original, I guess. Not really necessary, though. Unfortunately, there's no scene like the shotgun scene with Tom Savini. This remake has the same what the fuck mindfuck of an ending that the original had, but in this one, it actually makes sense. Spoilers, if you want to see this movie, if you want to see the original, then just turn this review off now. Throughout the movie, Frank Zito, who's the main character, the guy who Elijah Wood is playing, the guy who Frank Zito, or Joe Spinell was playing from the original, Frank Zito, throughout the movie, he's scalping girls and attaching these scalps to mannequins, and then to him, the mannequins become like real people. And he has this kind of trophy. This isn't in the original, or this isn't in the remake. He has this trophy mannequin who's like tied to his bed, and at the end of the movie, he comes home and all of the mannequins come to life and tear him to shreds. Like they're zombies. And then it cuts to some undisclosed amount of time later, and Frank is in his apartment and he's bled to death. And he's not torn to shreds, but he's bloody, he's bleeding. And in the original, it's not as explained why he just died. He does get injured, but it's not that severely. He just kind of comes home and then the mannequins become zombies and kill him. And then in this remake, he gets stabbed with a mannequin hand, with a metal bar that's sticking out of a mannequin hand, like in the gut. And then he gets hit by a car and run over. And then he walks home and he's bleeding really bad. And at the very end, when the cops show up, they find him in his closet, which is this motif that's going through this remake where he had to watch his mother fuck all these dudes in the closet. They find his body in the closet and he's bled to death. It looks like in this movie that the natural progression of injuries, the accumulation of injuries, was what did him in, whereas in the original it was a little bit fuzzy. I kind of liked that more in this movie, that they explained it a little bit more, because I'm the type of person that I like ambiguity up to a point. When it starts to defy the laws of our world, hence mannequins coming to life and like ripping a guy to shreds, I start to go, why did that happen? You need to actually explain that. I don't care if you're not explaining necessarily why he's not crazy. I'll be a little bit annoyed by it, but I'll leave it alone. But when you do something where you just kind of go into a fantasy zone for 5 seconds, and then you return to the real world, I'm a little like, hey, wait a minute, you should probably tell me what that was all about. And so that's something I appreciated about this remake a little bit more than the original.
Because in the movie, well, it's just a movie, it's fiction.
So the question comes down to, who do I recommend this movie to? Well, of course, I would very easily recommend it to fans of the original, but mostly just as a point of reference, a little grace note. That's actually kind of how I see the Soderbergh remake of Solaris. That it's not really its own film in and of itself. It's more just, a companion piece to the Andrei Tarkovsky version. And so this Maniac remake, it's not really its own film in and of its own right. It's just kind of a companion piece to the original. And if you haven't seen the original, go out and see the original and then watch this remake. This remake has a very similar tone. It's very similarly paced. It's just as slow, just as broiling. I like that. Maybe you won't like that. Maybe you'll find that boring. I'm a guy who likes kind of slow, boring movies. I've been accused of it, and it's true.
Please don't scream. You're so beautiful.
So firstly, I'd say, hey, go out and watch the 1980 version. And then if you're curious, if you liked that, then check out this version. If you like Elijah Wood, and you liked him when he played Kevin in Sin City, and you want to see him do more grotesque shit like that, then watch this movie. He has a lot of range. Watch Wilfred. Why not? She's a maniac.